Welcome to Forest Chat, where we talk about individual endeavour in Western Australia, what it takes, what it means, and how you do it. I'm your host, Paul Vandermeer, and in today's episode, we're talking with Jez Watts about being a stand-up comedian. Jez had his first on-stage episode about 13 years ago.
Episode? Sorry, I haven't been introduced yet, but yeah, go on.
Yes, fantastic. Well, episode of performance, I guess you'd need to call it then. Welcome to Forest Chat, Jez.
Thank you for having me, Paul. Yeah, sorry for jumping in there. Episode sounds like I had a breakdown and got cancelled.
Well, you've not been cancelled because you're doing touring and that sort of thing. Can you?
Oh yeah, and I'm not really big enough to get cancelled also. I think more enough people have to know who you are for a cancellation to happen. And yes.
Fantastic. So what are you doing in the world of stand-up comedy, Jez?
Well, I've been gigging for like 13 years. I'm based in Melbourne. I tour 6 months of the year-ish around Australia and New Zealand and Southeast Asia. I've done the Edinburgh Fringe a few times and done other countries as well. But yeah, I mean, stand-up sort of is a lot of things, really. As currently, as it used to be a career like before I started, going back, to like maybe like the 90s and the early 2000s, that you could just do stand-up and potentially like make an okay living from that. And then, as probably in most areas of society now, like money is harder to come by. And so now being a stand-up or like being a full-time comedian does mean doing a lot of different things, right? So I have like a podcast, I do live stand-up comedy, I do corporate gigs, I've got an agent to do cruise ships now, which I feel very conflicted about because I'm not like excited to be a cruise ship comedian, but I MC weddings, like it's just to get enough money to subsidize being a live performer now is sort of a big part of the job.
So there's a whole range of things. The cruise ship side of things, that's an interesting area, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, listen, so doing, so I have not, like full disclosure, I haven't done a cruise ship yet, right? But I got an agent for it a few months ago, and then these bookings will start to come in. Doing comedy on cruise ships is certainly much maligned, I think, as far as within the stand-up industry, within the sort of the art of it. That being said, it's paid well. And fundamentally, it's like rent has to be paid. And I have a fiance who has a proper job, and it's would be unfair to her if I can't pay my half of the rent, which a lot of the last couple of years, I haven't been able to pay my full half of the rent. And so it was something a couple of years ago, I started saying, okay, what are the other sort of avenues for more money than I've been getting from live stand-up, from festivals, that still sort of work within the skill set I've been building for like 13 years. And so that's why I started emceeing weddings, and I'm about to finish getting my celebrant's license. And after I put out my first special, which was maybe 6 months ago, like December last year, I, at that point, having, a full hour-length special, felt, okay, maybe I can reach out to other kinds of people now that I've sort of appeared to be more professional, or like it's more obvious that I can do the job. And so, yeah, I reached out to like an agency who books cruise ships. But yeah, I don't know, it's not exciting to me to do it, but it is exciting to make enough money that my partner's not upset.
Because that's when the laughing stops.
Well, yes. I mean, yeah, I talk a lot about our relationship on stage, which she's like, I'm very lucky that she enables me to do that because I'm very sort of revealing and explicit about our life together. And I'm quite a dirty comic as well. So it's like, there's a lot of like explicit sexual things that plenty of friends of mine who have partners in comedy, or like they're a comedian who has a partner, are not allowed to talk about those kinds of things. And so I'm very grateful for that for sure. But yeah, I've got multiple jokes where she's like threatening my life because I'm so poor. And those are very much based in reality.
So you talked about an hour-long special. Like,
Mm.
how does Like, where does it go? Where can people see it? Or
So it's up on YouTube. So it's called White Rice Supreme because I perform as Jez Watts. My legal name is Jez White Rice Supreme because, as we were talking about before the recording, like I got married when I was like 24 in Las Vegas with like an Elvis impersonator to a drug buddy friend of mine, and while we were both tripping on LSD, and she and I decided to pick a new last name together, right? Rather than her take my name or do a hyphen. And so we decided to both change our last names to Supreme so that we could introduce ourselves to people as the Supremes. Because we thought that was funny, right? And
yeah,
so we did that, and then I was changing my last name already, and my birth name is Jeremy, my first name, but everyone called me Jez for years. And I was like, well, I'm already changing my last name, I'll change the first name, and then it felt silly to keep the middle name. And so then I changed that to White Rice with a hyphen because, again, I thought it would be funny. So I tell a longer version of that, which is sort of more comedic or whatever in the special. And so that's sort of what it's named after. But yeah, it's up on YouTube. It's on like my channel. I had a distributor that was maybe going to put it out, and then that sort of fell apart at the 11th hour. And so I just put it out independently or whatever. But yeah, it's sort of, I've done at this point, I think like 10 different touring hours at festivals. And so this special is kind of the best of the first like 8 or 9. And yeah, I'm happy with the product. I will say that I have learned a lot from the experience of making it, like in terms of not only artistically but also pre-production and the live performance and the post-production process, like like working with the editors and the audio technicians and so on. So I think the next thing I make, which I'm sort of is probably going to be this hour that I'm touring now, is going to be a much better thing than the first, which is what you hope in art, right? That you get better over time.
yeah, that's right. It'll be a different process, but
Mm.
you've already got a heads up on a whole lot of different things that'll make it easier.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, like I mean, you make mistakes so that you can learn from them, right? And that's true in everything in life. And I wouldn't say that like there's definitely things I would change about this thing I put out, but I didn't know that what they were until I put it out. And then I went, "Oh, these are the parts that bother me, or these are the things that I now know how to do better." And it's exciting actually. Like certainly I'm just a far better comedian for having made it, and then for having had to, particularly in the post production, like watch and rewatch and give notes and go back and forth with the editor. There's a lot. There's even like performance like ticks that I was doing that I thought I had reviewed footage sufficiently before recording it, but then before you put this big thing out, because I spent like 15 grand making it as well, so it's like there was a lot of time and effort that it was more justifiable because it was this big project that yeah I mean it's so my partner is quite a she gives honest feedback, which not every comedian's partner does, which sometimes is very hurtful. But yeah, she came to see the show I did at the last Melbourne Comedy Festival, so a couple of months ago now, which this is like a new hour, still in progress, whereas that special was the best of so many things. And her opinion was that the new thing, which is only, let's say, 60% done, is the best work I've done. And that's very exciting to hear from someone who is really willing to be cruel.
It's not like you can get much better advice than that or
Oh, I,
direction.
I love it. I mean, yeah, I've had like comedian friends of mine have had partners who they don't want to hurt your feelings in private because they care about you, right? So they just say, "Oh, everything is great," or they're like maybe too easy to laugh or whatever. But that doesn't ultimately it hurts you more because when you're in front of a bunch of strangers, like you're not banging any of them. So they're going to be honest. They're going to be deathly silent if it's not funny at all. And you want to get that out of the way one on one if you can. So then the stuff you bring to stage is actually pretty good, hopefully.
Yeah, that makes a huge difference to getting a step up early in
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
process.
I mean, you get better over time, of course, understanding your own voice and how to generate material, and you get a better idea of what you're going to be able to make land anyway. But then having one-on-one sounding boards, whether that's colleagues that you sort of, or I'm very lucky that my partner's like very funny instinctively, and then on top, and very smart, and then on top of that, also like has an interest in the art of stand-up comedy. So she's very informed about what I'm trying to do, and then we sort of agree on the aesthetics of comedy enough that her feedback is useful. Comedy is such a broad tent, so there's all different kinds of comedy. And I used to think maybe 5 years ago, so let's say I was like 8 years in, I used to think if I didn't like it, it was bad. And I now understand, having been in a little bit longer, that it's like, oh, if I don't like it, it may be good, but it's just not for me. It can also be bad, right? But I used to just think everything I didn't like sucked. Yeah.
Well,
Anyway,
that's not necessarily the case. It's really
no, of
the
course not.
taste that you're working to, isn't it?
Mm, of course. I mean, that's the thing with all art, like there's famous artists and there are unknown artists. And just because they're famous doesn't mean they're good. Just because they're unknown doesn't mean they're bad. And the reverse is also true. Art is, subjective by its very nature. And also, like, I don't want to get too wanky about comedy or whatever. I think it's art, obviously. I think maybe that debate is sort of done at this point. But plenty of it sucks. And plenty of it's not very thoughtfully put together. And, you know, there's bad examples of every kind of art form.
So you talked about having sets and that sort of thing. So I'm
Hmm.
thinking there's things that we can talk about there, but how do you get into it in the first place? Like, what
Foolishness.
was it that actually, what was the drive? How did it happen?
Yeah, I mean, I've always loved stand up since I was very young. I think when I was yeah, when I was like, let's say early teens, maybe even into the single digits, like the first sort of stand up stuff I heard was on cassette tapes, this is now going so far back, which would have been like Rodney Rude, which, my God, like I listened to some of that not that long ago and I feel quite ashamed I ever liked it. But I mean, I was a kid, whatever. But then, really, what I would say is the first example of the tradition of stand up that I'm now more interested in, and that I've sort of chosen to be part of, it would have been like watching Eddie Murphy Delirious, which I think in the States and elsewhere it was just titled Comedian. But that special, my friends and I in high school would watch that sort of over and over again and memorize the bits and perform it to each other, which again, that's probably not something that anyone should be doing now, as white as I am. But yeah, that was sort of the first thing where I sort of saw Eddie Murphy and then later Bill Hicks and George Carlin and really loved it. But I sort of never felt that I would be working in the field, or I'd be even like allowed to do it, I suppose. Like I sort of have always suffered from like low self-esteem issues. And so I used to be a research scientist. I had a similar kind of experience with that I had with stand up, which for research science, or like even to get the degrees and go to study that, someone that I knew who I didn't think was that smart said, "Hey, I'm going to study molecular biology." And I went, "Oh, can regular folks do that?" I'm smarter than that person. I can do that. And so then I went to study molecular biology, and that was like one of the first things that I got a degree in. And so with stand up, what happened was I was living in New York at the time, and I met like an open micer, just someone who was just starting out. And she was funny, but it was just a thing where it demystified the idea. It's like I thought, oh, you could only be Stephen Hawking or not be in science, or you could only be Eddie Murphy or Richard Pryor or not be a comedian. And then, like in both examples, I saw someone who was starting out, and I went, oh, I'm allowed, which is silly because stand up has like the lowest barrier to entry of like any possible realm of society.
Well, you can think that the mechanics are low barrier to entry. Like you could do it with your phone if you wanted to,
You can.
but it's a psychological hump you've got to jump over.
I think the barrier to entry is nil. The barrier to staying in it is emotional resilience. Because even though my first set went pretty well, as I remember it, the second or the third set went really horribly badly. to the point, I believe it was my third time on stage. So I was dating my now fiance, but we were still pretty new in the relationship. But I have this quite vivid memory of like driving home from the gig, crying a little bit, and then getting home and she was on the couch and I like knelt on the floor in front of her and I had my head in her lap and I was just sort of weeping because the set had gone badly and I it just hurt so much. And that is maybe it's probably the most extreme response I've sort of had internally to bombing on stage, but that feeling does not get much better than that. It is so upsetting to, bare your soul to some degree, to maybe overly weight it, but to say, hey, here is me, here are the things that are important to me, and also here's what I think is funny, and then to have an audience give you nothing is, oh, it's bad, man. It's a bad feeling. And it's something that it holds a lot of us back, right? Because trying new stuff is risky. Doing old stuff that works already is much less of a risk. And so I have friends who've been doing comedy for ages who barely ever write anything new because it's scary, because it might fail. And so they end up sort of really limiting their own ability to grow as artists. And yeah, I think a constant push pull in comedy of like, all right, it's gonna hurt to grow. So do I just not try? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big driver, isn't it?
Mm.
Because if you let yourself down if you don't try.
Yes, but there's like a short-term benefit that you feel good about yourself, that people see you doing well on stage, and even in terms of like if you always do well on stage because you're always doing like the same whatever 5-10 minute set roughly, you're a safe booking. So you actually might get more paid work in the short term for that. But your ultimate growth as a comedian, as an artist, and then potentially your long-term earning ability as well is like hugely limited by that. And I think there is certainly been times in my career so far that I've probably been too focused on my long-term growth in a way that's sort of hurt me short term and then maybe even hurt me in the medium term because like there's people that keep seeing me failing on stage because I keep trying new stuff and then they go away. You don't know who's, talking to whom about how you are doing on stage or who's, going to start a room or whatever. And then they think, oh, yeah, Jez is not a safe booking. Whether or not they understand that it's like, I'm trying to grow, they just go, oh, well, I can't bank money on that performer. Whereas other people, yeah, who maybe are growing less are safe bookings because like, oh, they always do well. So I'll book them.
But then they may not get repeat bookings because everybody knows they're just going to do the same as they did
Yeah.
last time.
And that particularly is the case here in Australia because we have much less opportunity in terms of the amount of cities you can go to, the amount of clubs in each city, and therefore the audiences, right? So it's like if you're in the States and you go to, 50, 60, 70 cities a year, it sort of doesn't matter so much that your act doesn't change. But if you're in particularly Perth when I started, like there was like one open mic you could perform at regularly, and a lot of the audience would repeat. And even when I was like a year or two in, like I had started a regular room and a friend of mine had started a regular, so there were a few more gigs, but it's like 3 or 4 places you could perform, a lot of the audience repeating. If you're just doing the same set, I mean, that punishes that audience. I mean, comedy's about surprise and originality and stuff. So it's like even if your ideas are original, and of course you do need to refine sets and refine jokes through repetition, but ideally you're doing that in front of audiences that differ. And so that yeah, it can be. It's part of the reason I tour for 6 months of the year, even though I love to be home with my partner. It's that well, there's only so many gigs in Melbourne. There's only so much audience here and I need to put things in front of, different human beings to get reads from them in terms of developing that material. And also I need to repeat material in order to refine it. And so there's a great benefit, of course, then in going to different cities, different countries to do that.
That's the whole growth thing that you're doing. So Where do your ideas come from? I guess you get that question a lot.
Yeah, I would say it's probably the most common question from Uber drivers. Um,
Let me
I
make the noises.
yeah, yeah, yeah. If your demographic as an Uber driver has been divorced and is looking for someone to talk to, so I would say, yeah, in terms of like the way comedy works, I mean, it's different people do comedy very differently from one another. You know, there's all these different kind of styles of comedy. And then to some degree, it's a little hard to pigeonhole yourself, right? So my sort of comedic touchstones would be sort of like Mark Maron, Maria Bamford, John Mulaney. And what I mean by that is I tend to do very confessional, true stories from my life. Of course, it's important to have that be densely packed with punchlines. And there are plenty of times where I have a joke that maybe isn't intended to reveal a bunch of details about myself, but it's just a funny joke. But I think there is certainly a difference between telling jokes and doing stand up comedy. And what I mean by that is that jokes are a part of stand up comedy, but the hopefully what you are doing on stage uses jokes to do something else, right? And so my goal as a comedian in terms of the style of comedy I do is to reveal deep truths about myself and to reveal shameful things about myself in a way that I hope is of benefit to an audience in terms of how that relates to their own lives as well. So, there's certainly, I will have points of view expressed in my stuff, but as everyone does, sort of by whether they want to or not. Like Jerry Seinfeld does, jokes that supposedly reveal nothing about him, but they do reveal his values. And whether that's intentional, you always do reveal who you are on stage. Maybe less so if you're playing a character on stage, which, Anthony Jeselnik or Stuart Lee play characters on stage. But that persona also still reveals who they are, I think, as a performer, as a person. So yeah, I do true stories with punchlines, let's say. And then I tend to be fairly dark. I tend to be fairly dirty. And then sometimes people hear that as crass and offensive. That being said, I don't swear that much on stage, but I am very explicit. And while I do dark jokes, I very consciously try not to what's called punching down on, the disenfranchised members of society or the sort of the low status folks in the world. And that's, not just because I'm like living in Melbourne and must be uber woke or whatever the perception of that is, but it's just not interesting to me to occupy the position of power. I am like a ostensibly straight white male. I've blown a bunch of dudes, but like I identify as a straight white male and I live in Australia, and that is a position of privilege. That being said, I tend to be low status in my personal relationships and in life in general. And so that's the person I am on stage. And then to some degree, you sort of don't get to decide who you're going to be on stage. The audience tells you over time. Yeah, you work out when they laugh and why, and then that informs who you become on stage because you don't want to fail. So yeah, the audience tells you, I think. That's a long answer, so I apologize.
I quite enjoy a long answer. Just thinking about how, like you've talked about where your ideas come from and how all that forms. It's quite easy to fall into a stereotype. Like I've not spoken to anyone before who is a stand-up comedian, so it's a bit tricky to understand what I've missed, if you know what I mean, about
Right.
what
Yeah,
it
yeah,
is
yeah.
that you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think as well. I mean, it's such a like comedy is such a broad tent, right? Like, there's so many different, not only styles of stand up, but like even motivations for getting into it. So particularly now, I mean, the industry has changed so much. Now podcasting is so much more of the landscape of comedy, and even how people are getting paid to be comedians is more primarily coming now from the podcasting world than doing live entertainment. And like live podcast tours are not only like lower effort to execute, because it takes a long time to develop stand-up comedy, right? To make jokes and an hour or a show be actually good. The time from, let's say, inception to completion, if we're going to call it that, it does reduce over time as you develop more skill and understanding of who you are as a comedian and more expertise in the field. But it still takes ages. Like, it takes a year at least to get a really good hour. And that's doing it a lot, like doing the hour a lot, which is, more challenging here in Australia than in the States or the UK, where they've got more population density. But doing a live podcast takes, we just all need to get together at this time and maybe do 20 minutes of thinking about it. Maybe, if it's a comedy podcast, a lot of that's improv. So that's sort of become part of the landscape now of being a comedian, that if you went back 20 years, it wasn't, I mean, podcasts exist, but like this idea of doing like live podcast tours wasn't really a thing. And that's, I think, part of how social media has changed really all of our relationships to entertainment now, in a way that I don't think is to the benefit of stand-up. That being said, it's to the benefit of big podcasters who can, buy multiple investment properties. But yeah, anyway, sorry, go on.
Yeah, sorry.
I feel like I went on a random tangent there.
And I had the big inhale for the next question. It's really interesting, like as a society almost, we're losing that community connection, aren't we?
Absolutely.
Like, when you go and see somebody live, it has something.
There's a magic, yeah.
Yeah, that you can't get in a podcast.
Yeah, or watching it on your phone, And yeah, it is something that I like, particularly now with like the current global recession and the recession here in Australia. I mean, I understand why people don't want to spend money to go out to a live venue, buy drinks, buy food, buy the ticket, when people won't even sit and watch like a Netflix special on the TV anymore. They will watch it on their phone in pieces. And I am not saying that they're not allowed to do that, but it's like, for me, and I just love stand-up, and it primarily operates as a live art form. But then there's a lot of comedians that I've been hugely influenced by, who I'm huge fans of, who I've never seen live, or I saw them only recently, but I've been a fan of them for 20 years, Like, not that I think he's the best comedian in the world, but when Seinfeld came through Australia a few years ago, I went and saw him live, but I've been a fan of his writing and, the TV show that he made with Larry David, who I think, to be fair, Larry David is probably funnier than Seinfeld, but I've been a fan of him for most of my life without ever seeing him live. But then seeing him live, even in an arena setting, it's a different experience. And to me, it's a richer experience, because there is a back and forth between the audience and the live performer that you just can't replicate by watching a reproduced version of the show. And so for me, it's always very exciting when, someone I've been a big fan of for ages comes to Australia, or like if the times I've done Edinburgh Fringe, I'm like, oh, this is a performer here that doesn't come to Australia that I get to go and see live. And Stuart Lee is a great example of that. I have not seen him live, but I've been such a huge fan of his stuff forever. He's a true genius and one of the best comedians who's ever lived. Never seen him live, but if I ever get the chance to, it's going to be better than everything I've seen, than everything I've been a fan of, because it's going to have that immediacy and that interaction that an audience and a comedian has. And it's so cool.
And you see the whole picture, right from when they walk on stage to when they walk off. Whereas in a podcast, their beginning and end will be very structured, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, there's something as well with live shows is that, and this is because I've done, I think at this point, maybe 61 festivals. So you learn a lot about crafting a live show from that. And there's something I learned a few years in, the older comedian told me, which is that the show begins before the show begins, which is that the artwork of the show description, like clips they've seen of you, they're arriving at the venue, dealing with the door person, the music in the room, if you have like maybe like a pre-show slide reels playing or whatever, and then the music before you come out, that's all part of the show, right? That all like leads into your experience as an audience member. And I mean, the real beauty of stand up as a live art form is that you directly, as part of the audience, influence it. And a bad crowd, or just bad is maybe the wrong word. Let's say a crowd that's not into a show, they make the show worse. And a crowd that's really giving and really just enthusiastic make the show better. And so there's a magic to that of being in the audience. There's also a magic to that to being the performer, because you're sharing this connection together, and that connection elevates the material. A humorist writes funny things down, and then you read it in a book, and a joke teller will get on stage and just say a bunch of jokes in a row, and those jokes are going to come out the same. But stand-up comedy fundamentally shifts based on who is in the room. And that's, to me, one of the beautiful things about it, because there are so many elements that go into shaping what it is that in that moment. And that infinite variation is very exciting to me as someone who loves art and the art form, because you never know what this gig is going to be exactly. You can know you have material that's good, but you don't know what's going to land and how, and what you're going to find in the room and how.
Yeah, it's interesting. The few like really funny artists that I've watched on stage, they've had a real presence, and
Mm,
it looks like a very well practiced performance from the perspective of how they gesture and
mm.
walk and stand, the whole bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's, in my opinion, like the very best stand-ups. Like, I mean, there's an essential, I don't know if you call it a lie. Let's call it a suspension of disbelief that stand-up is sort of like underpinned with, which is the idea that in the moment, you in the audience are going to forget that they've said these things before, that they wrote them beforehand, that they iterated on the wording and the pacing, and you can hopefully feel that this is a conversation you're having with this person that is improvisational and genuine to the moment and will not be repeated. And it takes so much craft and experience and skill to successfully do that. And there are moments of genuine connection and genuine improvisation, of course, within any performance, however scripted. But if you can successfully make an audience feel like the whole thing is that, like, God, there's such a magic to that. And everything lands so much better if they feel that way, It's part of the goal, I suppose. But yeah, it's really cool from both sides of that.
So the learning process that goes beyond
Mm,
or behind all of that underpins it. Like you mentioned earlier about the older stand-up comedian that said, "Oh, the show begins before the show begins."
mm.
How much of that interaction with other stand-up comedians impacts on what you do?
Oh, hugely. Yeah. Stand up is it's an interesting art form in that it appears to be one that is one for, singular individuals. Like you're on stage alone, but it's very much I think a collaborative process in terms of how you develop as a comedian and how you learn from each other. There's an institutional knowledge in scenes where, like in comedy scenes in different cities or whatever, like in countries or at festivals, where younger people are learning directly from old, or like less experienced people. Because I started quite late, actually. I started at 29, But yeah, less experienced comics are really actively learning from older comedians, more experienced comedians, sometimes to their detriment. Like a lot of people will have an instinct of like, oh, I want someone to tell me how to do this, right? And that ends up becoming this blind alley of growth, because a more experienced comedian can only teach you how to be a worse version of them. And then ultimately you actually have to find your own path. And there's all infinite variation in comedy. And then what works for you will be different than what works for someone else. And so almost everyone who starts is like begging, because it hurts so much to bomb on stage. They are begging people who don't bomb or don't bomb as much, right? Because ultimately you should bomb to be growing. But they beg them, oh, please tell me how to do comedy because I don't want to feel bad. And yeah, I've now reached a point in certainly here in Melbourne that I'm sort of one of the more old hands here. And so people will often ask me for advice, and I'm very careful to tell them you should not take advice. You have to find your own path, and that's going to be ultimately much more beneficial for you. There's really basic things I'll tell people, but I try to be really careful not to impact their creative development. There's things like, okay, your mic technique sucks. Like you need to really eat that mic because it's like not clear to hear you, or hey, move the mic stand out of the way, or whatever. But failing is part of the process. So trying to shortcut through failure, and it's I think is true of everywhere in life, not just stand up, but trying to shortcut through failure or avoid failure, like it prevents your growth. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So like I mean I read a book about comedy when I started. A lot of people do that. And there were things I learned. And some people will do like comedy courses or comedy classes, before they start. It is scary to start. I say the barrier to entry is nothing. There is an emotional risk, of course, to doing it, unless you're one of these crazy people that actually believes in themselves. Yeah, there's all different. I mean, audiences inform you, and then your collaborators and colleagues inform you. And certainly, once you're sort of in for a little while, you tend to start having people who have maybe similar comedic sensibilities or work ethics, who you start to sort of collaborate with those people more. Like a good friend of mine, her Huang, she has like a way better career than me for, various reasons. But we collaborate a lot on her shows, right? Because I understand her comedic voice. We're very good friends. I know her background. And, we just spend a lot of time together. And I'm a good joke writer and I understand structure and I care about stand up. And so, pretty much every one of her festival shows, she'll get me along to an early work in progress performance, and then probably one like mid run. And then if she's going to record it, which, she has recorded something before, she's about to record something again, she'll get me along before the recording happens again to give like very detailed notes and thoughts on structure, joke ideas, tags. And I've got like loads of jokes in her act that have been on stages I can never get on. But I've got my jokes on there, which is cool. And I've helped my friend. And then she helps me too, right? Like she sees my stuff and she's like, hey, this is working, that's not working. And, that kind of thing is very part and parcel of comedy. And I think the people who avoid it because it's scary to get negative feedback, it limits their growth. It's the same as like doing that same set over and over again, is not asking for feedback from people you admire also limits your growth. But it's scary to get negative feedback. I get that.
So that's a really good example where you help each other out, but you're not
Mm.
actually standing on each other's toes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, I mean, there's a very classic sort of trope in stand up. Probably it's true in society in general, that if someone offers you unsolicited advice, it's gonna be a man. And if you're a woman, that's gonna happen a lot, which sucks. And so yeah, it's something of like, yeah, we give each other notes. One, because we're close friends, and then two, because we've made it clear that we want them from each other. She and other female comic friends of mine who are crushes will have male audience members come up constantly to give them, oh, you should say this, you should say that. And I very rarely have that happen. And it's just because I'm a dude, right? And there's just that societal idea of like men just are confident because the world told them it's theirs. But yeah, so giving unsolicited advice is a no-no, whether you're a man or a woman. But yeah, sometimes I will, particularly if they're a younger comic, and especially if it's a female younger comic, if I think of a tag or something, like I'm not going to give any kind of unsolicited advice in terms of overall structure or premises or whatever. But if I think of a tag, I would want it. So then, if it's someone I don't know as well, or particularly if they're a woman, I will message them or mention it to them. Hey, I've got some tags if you want it. I'm not going to throw, hey, you should say this at them because they get too much of that already, and from unfunny people, by the way. But yeah, but it's like I always want people's notes, whether I agree with them or not. Because if someone gives you a note you don't agree with, at least thinking through the process of it, where you go, okay, does that make sense? That helps you understand better what you're trying to do, even if you don't use it. And then I have certain people, some who of whom have now quit stand up, who are just so funny anyway, who I regularly will go to for notes in different cities. I'll say, hey, can you come to the show? I'll give you free tickets and give me any thoughts you have. And so I've got certain friends that some are like ex-comedians, some are still comedians. One's my partner, who've got loads of jokes in my shows. And, that's a collaborative process with them. And it elevates my work, which is great. And I'm very grateful for.
Taking a step back, how much private practice does it take?
What do you mean by private practice?
Well, I don't know the exact format that you might use, but it could be when you're coming up with jokes and working them out for the first time. Do you like video yourself and review it or anything
Oh,
like that?
sure. Yeah, I mean, certainly so my approach to developing material and, jokes and shows, it's changed a lot over the years, right? And that's one of those things early on. You're asking everyone, how do you write jokes? Because you're trying to work out your process. And I had a really funny comedian who was, a few years ahead of me. I think, yeah, I think probably I was like maybe 3 or 4 years in, and he would have been like at 8 or 9, maybe 10. And yeah, he mentioned something to me that really stuck with me. He said it takes, because there's this idea in comedy that it takes 10 years to quote, find your voice. But yeah, he said something that it takes about 7 years to even find your process. And I think that is about right for me, actually, and it's probably true for a lot of people. So I had a lot of different techniques I was trialing when I was, year 0 to 3 or 4. And some of these you hear a comedian on a podcast talking about their process. Go, I'm going to try that approach. Whether it's automatic writing, or whether it's like every morning when I wake up, I write for 10 minutes and then I put it down, and then I'm thinking about it subconsciously the rest of the day. Or like at one point, I think Jerry Seinfeld does this or did this, but like I had a wall calendar with every day marked on there. Cross off the calendar and try not to break the chain. I have to write every day. And then so I've had all different kind of approaches. Now what I do, or what I've come to over the last however long, is I do write things out long form. I don't tend to. When I first started, I think I was basically writing out a script and then trying to memorize the script and then repeat the script on stage, which I needed to go through that process, but that's not a good way to do it. It sort of undercuts the live aspect of it. So what I do now is I have a physical notebook I bring with me to gigs. I write all my set lists in there. I have like a little pre-show ritual that I go through there, which is sort of a almost a meditative like writing ritual to get myself in the right mindset. And I will write, if there's new lines or things that I'm working on the specific wording on, I'll write those out longhand, just those sections. But ultimately, it's more or less it's a record of that live gig. It's a prep for it and a record of it after, and in the review process, I'll go through that. Then I have like a notes app on my phone where I got this from a comedian who is based in Australia, originally from the States, called Mike Goldstein. But he had, I heard him maybe even talking in a podcast or in a green room or something. But he has a notes app for each month of the year, which is comedy notes, right? So I've, July 2026 notes. And then so anytime, because I always have my phone with me, anytime I think of anything comedic that I'm like, oh, that's funny, good line or a premise or whatever. So I have to stop what I'm doing because otherwise it's ephemeral, it'll go away forever if I don't write it down. Pull out the phone, just make notes of it in there. Sometimes I'll write things out in there, even like a little bit long form. But then when I'm like really developing a bit, because it's a spoken art form, it's like I will be sitting at my laptop in my office and I'll be like writing it, but I'll be saying it as I'm writing it and then rewriting it. And, I sort of have my office door closed. I might be pacing around, restate it out. And sort of that process of writing it out gets it to a point where I'm like, okay, cool. Now I can take it to an open mic, do it on stage in front of people. Part of that first performance is trying to remember what I wrote. Part of that is, okay, what's landing with these people? How does this actually sound now that I'm saying it to human beings? Then I'm going away iterating on that. And so then it's like the iteration uses all those processes, right? Where it's like, okay, I might make a note on the phone when I get back to my car. Hey, like this worked, or I'll be driving back home from the gig or to another gig or whatever, and I'll have to pull over the side of the road because I've thought of a much better way to phrase something. If I don't write this down, it's gone. So I've got to pull over, hazard lights on. Okay, this is the new version of this line. And if I'm lucky, I had multiple gigs that night and I can run it again immediately. But yeah, different people have really different processes. Yeah.
So you're talking multiple gigs a night. How does that work?
Well, that's why, because we were supposed to move to the States for comedy, and then Trump just has destroyed it, so we're not there. That's why we're in Melbourne, because of the Australian cities, it's got the most gigs. It's nowhere near enough for my purposes of how I want to grow. That being said, we like my partner and I have a much better life together. Like our partnership is better for being here in Melbourne than being in a failed state of like America. Or I lived in the UK years ago for a couple of years. That's a very like economically, it's much easier to make it as a stand up there, but it's a very grey sort of miserable place, and it would
Well,
be
it
a
could probably suits your dark jokes, but not your happy ones.
well, you can make any jokes work for anyone, really. But yeah, it is just a place where it's like our life would be worse overall if I was like a single person or someone who wasn't very lucky to be as in love as I am with my partner. I was planning to move to the States. I probably actually would have moved to the UK because it's just an easier transition to do that in terms of visas and all that kind of stuff. And with the state of these countries, I probably would have moved to the UK years ago. I certainly have gone there multiple times to do the Fringe and other gigs, but just to do way more spots, right? And therefore to develop faster and better as a comedian. Here in Melbourne, I most nights I perform, I don't get to do multiple gigs a night, but sometimes I do. So I get to do 2 or 3 gigs. So you'll try to go on early at one. Say, hey, can I go on early at this show, and then go on midpoint at this show, and then late on this show, and then if you're lucky, if everything works out, you get to all the gigs on time, and no one's mad at you. That process is incredibly beneficial for developing material because if you've got something new, you just don't know if it's good or how it's good until you put it in front of people. And this happens all the time. It's a very well-known sort of trope in comedy that you'll do a brand new piece of material and the thing you think is the punchline gets nothing. And the thing you think is the premise, which is not the funny part, gets a big laugh. And then you go, oh, turns out I was wrong about the punchline. I didn't even know where it was, right? The audience tells you. And so getting to iterate on that, not just wording, but also structure and ideas, getting to iterate on that in one night is really, really useful because you're sort of riding the high of the gig or whatever. And then, so on the drive to the next gig, you're like, oh, here's how I'll change this. Here's what I'm going to open on instead. And you get to try it again straight away and not have to sit in it for like a day or 2 or 3. Like I have like New Zealand comedian friends, even in Auckland, which is like their biggest city, and they're like pro level comedians. They're like, oh, I get up once every 2 weeks. That's all I can get. It's not enough. I get up on average, I would say about 5 times a week here in Melbourne. That's actually not quite enough. But part of that is the lack of more gigs. Part of that is that I really value my relationship with my partner, which we've been together for 13 years, and like we're getting married soon, and I'm really lucky to have, for all the, frustration I give her financially, I'm lucky to have a relationship like this where we both love each other and care about each other and like each other as much as we do, which not every long-term relationship has both like and love. And so part of that is making time to be home. And that means that there's days where I could go out to do a gig, maybe not that great a gig, but I instead choose to stay home and have quality time with my partner. And it's like, well, that means I'm a worse comedian than I would be, but it means I got a better life. And ultimately, because I talk a lot about my relationship on stage, and there is a sort of, and I think it's, I've had multiple comedians over the years back announce me with, wow, that guy really loves his partner. Like, I talk about her so much on stage, and I think she's so great. And that's something that tends to be underrepresented in stand-up, because stand-up as a job negatively impacts relationships. You're away from home all the time. You have insecure money. Loads of comedians who tour all the time will cheat on their partners. I don't do that, right? Like, I think she's great. I'm willing to make sacrifices in areas of my life to make the relationship good, as she also makes sacrifices, like, I actually forgot the question that led me to this now. She's great, is my point.
Multiple gig,
oh, yeah. Yeah. Doing multiple gigs, no, it's great.
Jez, what's coming up for you? What's next?
So I'm going to Darwin for Darwin Fringe with this new touring hour, which is called Animal Magnetism, because I now have a house full of possums pretty constantly, which turns out I'm allergic to, which is fun. But yes, I'm taking that hour to Darwin, July 22 to 25, Darwin Fringe, and then I'm going to Singapore to do some like headline shows there, and then Thailand, which I've not performed in before. I was actually putting together a whole Southeast Asia run on the way to the Edinburgh Fringe, and then when like the Iran war kicked off, I cancelled my Edinburgh Fringe plans because I was like, I don't know what's going on with this. So then I cancelled Edinburgh, and then I picked up a corporate in Hobart that was like right in the middle of the Southeast Asia run. And anytime someone's going to pay me like several $1,000s to do 15 minutes, I have to take the job, right? Because I need to pay rent. And so I've cancelled like sort of the back half of the Southeast Asia run. So I'm doing Singapore and Thailand. I was supposed to be doing Malaysia and Indonesia and Vietnam. Those are not happening this tour. And then I'm doing Hobart because that's where the corporate is. So I'm like, I'll just add a show there. Early August. And then, I'm still working on this hour. It's sort of the Australian festival season, particularly. It's like more or less is the first 6 months of the year. And then there's sort of this festival treadmill where people go, oh, we do a new hour every year. But they never actually like make it good. They make it like, okay. And then they go, okay, and now for the new one. And there's like an economic imperative behind that. This show, having now recorded a special and put it out, I don't want to like throw this show away when it's half done. So this show I'm going to keep touring next year under this current title, which I think it's mostly was performed under an old title, but like it's so that this has been evolving, and then I'll record this. Yeah, so I'll probably take it to Adelaide next year. I'll do Melbourne again. I haven't taken it yet I've done like a lot of New Zealand with it, but I haven't done Sydney yet, haven't done Brisbane yet, Newcastle, other cities. That stuff will all be on my website, jezwatts.com, jezwatts.com. And I'm also trying to be more diligent now about clipping up clips and, being part of this online content treadmill that I think is stupid, but actually is quite necessary now.
That keeps everything pumping along, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, it helps. It helps for, ticket sales and people finding who you are and all that kind of stuff. And, as I say, I put stuff out, but only when I think it's good. And so I don't put out anywhere near what I'm like quote unquote supposed to, but at least I put out stuff, which up until this special, I'd done like nothing online. And yeah, that was probably wrong of me, but ultimately I'm like, I'm happier with the content now that I have more time to cook.
All the best with your future endeavours, Jez.
Oh, thanks, Paul. And you as well.
Thank you. You've been listening to Forest.chat, where we talk about individual endeavour in Western Australia, what it takes, what it means, and how you do it. I'm your host, Paul Vandermeer, and in today's episode, we've been talking with Jez Watts about being a stand-up comedian. Remember, there are 4 ways to get involved with Forest.chat. Share the domain Forest.chat with your friends and family and people you meet. When you sign up for emails, you get early advice of the episodes. Listen to the episodes at forest.chat/episodes. If you do something interesting or you think somebody might be interested in what you do, book an interview at forest.chat/interview. If you want to support a small business, book an advert at forest.chat/advert. I'm looking forward to joining you with our next guest. Until then, enjoy making it happen.